Welcome to another episode of Called Bank Sports. We're 2 games into the preseason, which means we have a lot more information on the team than we used to. But before we jump into that and kind of what we've seen, I just want to give a shout out to our fantasy league. We've had several people sign up. There's still several spots left, so if you want to play fantasy basketball with us, we're trying for a big league of 20 people, which is kind of big for fantasy basketball, but I think it'll be fun. It might make your teams a little bit more realistic rather than just having a bunch of starters riding your bench. So the link is in the description. It will be in the pinned comment. Feel free to sign up for that. It should be a ton of fun. And the prize for the winner will be $50. We've announced a $50 Utah Jazz swag package, but I know there's some people who signed up who aren't Jazz fans, so we might just change that to be your favorite team if you're not a Jazz fan primarily.
And the draft's going to be next Saturday.
Yeah, next Saturday at noon Mountain Time. So if you're not in our time zone, then keep that in mind. But with that, let's jump into things. I think the big story of this past week has been Jared Butler.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing to notice is you have to kind of look at where his stats come. Like in the game against the Spurs, he did really bad when playing against the Spurs starting roster. But then once he got into here's kind of the continuation of Summer League, like who's fighting for a roster spot, he did really good, which makes a lot of sense. Like he just won the national title last year at Baylor. But against the Mavericks, he did really good, really quick in that game, like just significantly better, quicker. He didn't start that game. He still came off the bench. But, I mean, in 30 minutes, he was 9 of 18 from the field, 3 of 7 from 3, 1 for 2 from the line for 22 points. He's definitely been showing that he has the ability to be successful in this league. I don't think he's ever going to be starting point guard caliber successful, at least on a championship team, but he could come in and kind of replace Joe Ingles as the backup point guard, and that would be really good for the Jazz.
And here's actually, so I looked up the Utah Jazz depth chart on ESPN, and I'm curious, so specifically with Jared Butler, they have him on the depth chart somewhere for point guard and shooting guard. And so there's a couple things I thought were interesting. That the first thing is they put Mia Oni as the fifth string shooting guard, and they put Jared Butler as the fourth string. So ESPN has Jared Butler above Oni in the depth chart. Do you think that's kind of where the Jazz are seeing him right now?
I'm not sure entirely. I mean, Oni and Butler are both pretty similar in my mind. I think the biggest reason that I would do that is if I was putting the depth chart in order of the likelihood that this will happen. And because Oni really hasn't seen a lot of minutes and hasn't been able to break into the roster, I feel like Butler's has a much higher chance of being able to break into the roster just because he hasn't had that opportunity yet.
And you mentioned that like Joe Ingles is typically the backup point guard.
Yeah.
And this might just be ESPN being like not really knowing the Jazz as well as we do, but they don't have Joe Ingles in the depth chart at all for point guard, and they have Jared Butler as fourth. So Mike Conley's obviously starting, Jordan Clarkson's second, Donovan Mitchell's third, and then Jared Butler's right behind that. So I don't know. Like, I guess Jordan Clarkson comes in at point guard, but he's not really a point guard.
No, I mean
Jared Butler's the only other like actual point guard on the roster, and Joe Ingles can fill in there.
Joe Ingles is technically, I guess you'd say, point forward, but it's not like the Jazz are playing a small ball guard, when he's playing point forward. Like he is the point guard, and with Rudy Gay being out for the foreseeable future, the Jazz are going to need a backup power forward. So if you slide Joe Ingles down to power forward and let Jared Butler take those point guard minutes at the start of the season, that leads to, instead of, finding someone to get those Rudy Gay minutes, you kind of bring in Butler to snag those minutes.
Cool. I hope I get this is kind of my prediction for him, at least at this like first half of the season, is he's going to be in that kind of Mia Oni role where he's not playing most games, but the second one person's out of the rotation, and because he's kind of competing with Oni here, it might be two people out of the rotation for Butler. But then you start seeing him playing minutes, and like Oni, it's not like he was just playing the garbage minutes when he needed to play. He played good minutes, and he came in and contributed. So I'm hoping to see that from Butler when we have a few injuries, but
Well, see,
I'm not expecting to see him most every game when we're healthy.
I think what's going to happen with Butler is he's going to be picking up a lot of time for Mike Conley, just because Mike isn't going to be playing back-to-backs. And I think the Jazz were fortunate enough to have the least amount of back-to-backs this year out of any team, if I remember correctly. But because he's not going to be playing back-to-backs, you're going to slide Joe into the starting position, probably. And then you're going to need someone to take Joe's minutes off the bench. And that's probably going to be Jared Butler. That's what I would lean towards, just from what I've seen in preseason. But it could be Mia Oni. I just think, if I remember correctly, Butler has shown a lot better glimpses as a shooter so far than Oni has. And that's really, from my understanding, the knock on Oni. Like, he's shooting 34% from three. And you honestly can't be a backup guard in the league and be successful if you can't hit the 3-point shot. Especially on the Jazz. Like, to be on the Jazz, you do need to be able to hit those threes.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see how Butler transitions into that. Like, we haven't seen a ton from him as far as NBA 3 level. I know he had a good free throw shot, and it wasn't amazing, but he had a good enough percentage that, like, I think there's definitely potential there. I think he'll probably come in and be that 34% level this season, but the Jazz also have to think about the future, because he could definitely work on that in a few seasons, be up at the high 30s or low 40s.
Yeah. And the biggest issue with players like him who are old college players going into the draft, I believe he's 22, is you don't get to see a lot of growth from them over a period of time. Like, think about the growth that Donovan Mitchell had from 20 to 22. Yeah. And you already know that you're not going to get that growth from Jared Butler. And you can have older college players come in and just have a lot of growth. Like, how old was Damian Lillard when he entered the league?
I think 21, 22. I think he left after his junior year, if I remember correctly.
So he was definitely, he was a bit older. So he was he was born in July 1990, and that was the 2012 draft. So he was turning 22. I can't remember what month the draft typically takes place in, since the last 2 years have been so discombobulating with COVID changes and everything. But so he was an older player who came into the league and had a lot of success, but that typically doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I think for like Jared Butler, I think the player that he should be looking to emulate is Fred VanVleet, because he was also an older player. He's a point guard. I think Jared Butler's taller than VanVleet. So Fred took his time. He put in the work, and now he's an excellent player. I wouldn't call him a superstar or anything, and I don't think Jared Butler really has superstar potential. But Jared Butler, if he kind of follows that growth path, he could steal an all-star game at some point in his career. That's probably not likely, because of the point guard position is always so tough to get an all-star position in the NBA. But like, if there's a down year, if there's some injuries, Jared Butler might be able to snag one if he kind of takes that and tries to follow that path.
Well, let's be honest, like, early lottery is the only point where you kind of are really expected to go and have an amazing career. Like, once you get past pick 7 and 8, like, there's a lot of riding on you. But even then, and then once you get down to like pick 20, you're still a first round draft pick and should be successful. But it's not like that you're expecting to be an all-star. The goal at that point is to be a good rotation piece. And sometimes you have players who will come out and, outlast their expectations and just do a lot better than everyone thought they would. So when you look at Jared Butler, probably would have been around pick 20 if it hadn't been for his health concerns. Like, there is a chance for him to be great, but typically that's not what you expect. So it'll be awesome if it happens, but it's just taking a shot at him.
And if you look at Gobert, like picked at 27, like he came into the league and he really wasn't good, but he worked at it, and like you can see the work that he put in. He's added a lot of muscle, even though he's still kind of on the skinny side. And he really has studied defense and worked at that. So I think that's what the Jazz kind of look for, is they understand they're not going to get someone like a Cade Cunningham or a Jalen Green who's going to come in and impact things immediately, but they're going to find someone who is smart and is willing to put in the work, so that by the time their rookie contract's up, they're either like borderline starter or like an awesome rotational player. And I think that's kind of where Jared Butler, I think that's where I expect him to be in 3 years. As long as his health conditions don't cause anything further. I think that's a big question mark with him.
No, it definitely is. But the fact that he was cleared to play definitely kind of made him a stay away for some teams. But I still feel like, obviously, he was cleared to play. Like, the NBA does not want to have a player die on the court. Like, there's a reason why Chris Bosh hasn't played. There's a reason why there was the concerns with Horford coming back. Like, there's a reason why a Butler player from a few years back wasn't allowed to enter the NBA. They've had a player die on the court. They've had a couple players, I think, die on the court, and the NBA doesn't even want to get near that for multiple reasons that we could talk for a long time on. So I am pretty confident in his health. But then he also wasn't drafted until pick 40. So the NBA teams know more than me, or was it just really a stay away from them and they didn't want to be the person to pick him and have something happen?
Yeah. And I guess we'll find out in a few years, but and with those like second round picks, I almost feel like NBA GMs just kind of talk to each other and call dibs.
Yeah,
because I feel like
you have the 60 seconds, and it's just, how do you do it? That was hilarious to find out.
So I wouldn't be shocked if that's happened in the past, where they don't like. There's no pressure for the second round for them. If they botch a second round pick, no one cares. And so sometimes
unless it's just not getting Nikola Jokic,
just like then build up goodwill. They'll be just like, you know what? I might want to make a trade with him later. He told me he wants his player. Yeah, they can have it. I won't pick him, even though he's kind of the obvious pick at pick 38.
Speaking of GMs, did you see who has the best home court advantage according to this year's GM survey?
No,
the Utah Jazz. And I'm excited. I'm so excited to have full capacity arenas again. It's going to be a fun year.
And the Jazz are 100% vaccinated, right? So
yes, the Jazz are 100% vaccinated.
That wouldn't impact players playing here, but it's kind of a plus. And if anything goes down, that is also a plus. And then when we play Golden State or New York teams, then
so at least in Golden State, and I think in both of them actually, it only applies to the players on the home teams. So, which is something I learned a while ago.
That's so weird.
You're not worried about Kyrie Irving, who's not going to get a play, possibly depending on how long this policy stays in effect, who's not going to get a play 44 games or 43, because you have the 41 home games, and then they're going to be playing in the Garden twice against the Knicks.
If you're the Nets, would you even consider moving back to New Jersey just for a season so that Kyrie can play?
Just find a new arena, change your venue, just be like, hey, local high school.
Imagine how expensive tickets would be.
That would be crazy. Well, I don't even think you could do that, since the court would be like 10 to 20 feet too short, but that would just be, oh my gosh. No, that's a really valid concern. Like, I can't remember. I think, didn't we pick the Nets to get like the 2 seed? And obviously they've shown to be successful without Kyrie, but I mean, if Kyrie misses over half of the regular season games played in New York, and then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I'm just going to take this road trip off to go like clubbing, for for a week or two,
He
which
pulled the
he's
Dennis
done.
Rodman.
I mean, he did that last year, right? And he claimed personal reasons, and I don't know what the personal reasons were, but it doesn't look good going to like a super crowded club for someone's birthday party during COVID when you're skipping your team's games. Like, that's not a good look. Like, we can be honest about it. So I don't know. The Nets are a disaster. And I still think that if they have their whole team, that I don't know who can beat them. I really don't. Like, I love the Jazz, but I can't think of a defensive way. If you pull Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant all out to the perimeter and then space the floor with a couple more shooters, like, what are the Jazz going to do? And I don't even know what they do.
Yeah, well, and even with Kyrie and James Harden out, Kevin Durant is good enough.
They almost
team to the finals.
They almost beat the Bucks. You know, foot on the line away from beating the Bucks.
And
like
Kevin, like I love Kevin Durant when he's on the Thunder. Obviously, like I don't love super teams, so I wasn't a fan. But like
yeah,
and he's been under heat, but he's like his whole career basically, especially after he left the Thunder. But someone talked to him and they said, oh, like they basically said, oh, if it wasn't on the line or if you hit that last shot, you'd probably be the NBA champion right now. And Kevin Durant's like, no, we wouldn't. He's like, I was playing like 48 minutes a game in non-overtime games.
Fair enough.
He's like, I couldn't do that for 2 more series. And they're like, well, like James Harden could have healed. He's like, no, James Harden was playing on a hamstring injury. You don't heal when you play on a hamstring.
Yeah.
So I'm for the Nets. I'm glad that Kevin Durant kind of has that mindset where he's like, oh, we have a lot of work to do, and we need to figure some stuff out. The downside though is Kevin Durant didn't like, well, and maybe it's not a downside because Kevin Durant really doesn't have a lot of work to do. Like, what else did you want him to do in that series?
No, that's fair. I mean, in the end, though, like what kind of ticks me off about Kevin Durant is recently when him and Draymond Green had their little like, let's blame Warriors management on Kevin Durant leaving, and not actually taking any personal accountability for not being able to like have discussions as grown-ups and like work through their differences. And it's fine if you don't want to do that, and it's fine if you want to leave, but then to blame that on management when it's like, no, the disagreement was between you two, and you two can grow up and talk about it instead of being the perpetual child that is Draymond Green. I honestly will not be shocked if Draymond Green is not a Warrior partway through this year. Like, I don't know if his number is going to be retired there. Like, there's a lot of love from the fans. But at the same time, like, he's hurt them just as much as he's helped them.
I think it probably comes down to Steph. If Steph wants Draymond there, Draymond will be there. If Steph says, hey, if you can get another All-Star for Draymond, let's do that.
I still think there's a chance that Ben Simmons ends up making his way to Golden State. Like,
Golden State's probably waiting for trade value to drop.
Yeah, well, since you're not getting 4 first-round picks for Ben Simmons, like...
No.
I totally get that. Still, and maybe this trade fell through, but the fact that it seems like they decided not to trade Ben Simmons for James Harden just still will like always be a trade that made no sense to me. I mean, especially after last postseason, like just cementing in my mind that if that trade was available, you should have done it, since I just feel like James Harden and, of course, when basketball names leave your head just entirely, James Harden and the center and Joel
Embiid, yeah,
would just be a much better match. Just someone who only plays outside the paint versus someone who's best when they play inside the paint. I mean, that's what you want in the NBA if you have a dominant center.
Yeah, and a star like James Harden next to Embiid, is scary. Yeah, I don't know. Simmons is an interesting one. I think he'll be one of those players that as soon as he figures out how to take a step back and like Brook Lopez kind of did, where Brook Lopez is like, oh, I'm not the dominant center I used to be. Let's learn how to shoot.
Yeah.
Like if Ben Simmons kind of like gets some humility, takes a step back, realizes, oh, I'm not the star player on a championship team right now. If I want to win, I need to fill a different role. then I think he'll be an awesome piece as soon as he does that.
He could be the most disappointing rookie of the year of all time.
I don't know.
I don't know enough on that, but
there's Michael Carter Williams.
Fair enough. I don't actually know anything about that, but just looking at him, just being like, he does need to learn how to change. And of course, somehow, somewhere, every conversation this offseason just degrades into Ben Simmons talk.
I know.
Just like
we didn't even plan this.
The root of all evil is Ben Simmons talk, and that's how you get to it. Like, mention the Nets, all of a sudden you're at James Harden, and then what if the trade had been for Ben Simmons, and you're just there. So we'll spare you more Ben Simmons talk. Thank you for everyone tuning in this week. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't. We're pushing for 500. We'd really love to get there before the season starts, so please help us out. We won't be doing an episode next week. Join us in the fantasy draft, and then we will see you live Wednesday, October 20th for the Oklahoma City game. So see you post game then, and go Jazz.